This is about becoming a force for good and global change. I was talking to somebody at lunchtime about how I'm so bored of just going to things where we talk about things. And what I really, really wanted to make sure that we do is have action and we do something. And so this is kind of starting to talk about that, and the next 2 days we'll build on it. So let me introduce your moderator who can take over from here. Joshua DeFrancis, or Josh, however you prefer, is the head of incubation at LG, Nova and LG Electronics. Previously, he was co-founder of the United States Digital Corps and served as the executive director of the White House Presidential Innovation Fellows Program, an elite non-partisan tech fellowship founded by the United States CTO in the Obama administration out of the Office of Science and Technology Policy in the White House. Let's invite Joshua, right? You went up. There you are.
My name is Silvia Bastante de Unfarjao. I'm originally from Lima, from Peru. And growing up in a country with so much poverty and inequality, I wanted to change the world and make the world a better place from a young age. I studied government and economics in my first degree in London, and then I went to work in Washington, D.C. And I was super disappointed because I thought these big international organizations do not sufficiently change our world. I think some parts are quite effective, so it's not a criticism overall, but I wasn't convinced, let's put it that way. Then I thought maybe an NGO does it differently, moved back to London to work for Amnesty International. And again, after a couple of years, I wasn't convinced. I thought people had a lot of passion for human rights, but not enough strategic planning and good management that is sometimes needed to make a difference. So then I became a strategy consultant. I did that for over 10 years because I thought that that's where I could learn the skills that were missing in the non-profit or philanthropic sector. And thereafter, I focused on advising philanthropists, advising ultra-high net worth individuals on how they can have impact with their resources. And the conversation goes beyond pure philanthropy to include sustainable investing and impact investing. So I'm currently an independent philanthropy advisor. I'm also a senior advisor to Co-Impact, which is a collaborative of some of the world's biggest philanthropists, which maybe we can discuss a little bit later. And I'm so happy to be here with all of you today.
Great, fantastic.
Wow, how do I top that lovely accent as well? I'll just start. Hey everyone, I just want to thank Hans, Martin. I want to thank Tiffany for the work you guys are doing. So let's give them a round of applause. Because, really appreciate it. Okay, Sakyi Oduro. That name is from Ghana. My dad's from Ghana. He just passed a few months ago, so I'm dealing with that. Where do I start? I started my career after the Navy in the music business. So for about 10 years, I worked with artists from Joan Osborne to Jay-Z to Eminem to, you know, Cecilia Bartoli. So I covered every genre, country music. So I developed artists. The last artist I probably developed was an artist named Nelly. He was a rapper, pretty successful. And then after that, I went into financial services, you know, because that's what you do after you tour the world with, you know, Eminem as you go into, you know, crunch numbers. So I did that for another 10, 15, PwC. You know, I was in the corporate kind of monolith. And what do you discover in that corporate monolith? It's a black hole, right? And so I decided to get into impact. So I advised a fund called Lockstep Ventures because we want women founders and minority founders to kind of advance in lockstep with where the society is going.
Fantastic. Well, excited to kick it off. This has been really interesting around the roles of gender in the workplace and in society. And maybe I'd love to start and hear a little bit about, you know, you're a successful woman in business and entrepreneurship. And I'd love to hear a little bit about your journey and any insights you have along the way for maybe others that are earlier in their career or, you know, want to become a successful woman in business.
That's a very good question and one that I'm not fully prepared for, but I'll give you my best possible answer. I think when I was younger, when I was starting my career, what I could see is that the women that made it to the top almost behaved like men. and the model of leadership was a very masculine model of leadership. And what I see that is changing now is that there's a number of women in my generation and in the generation maybe ahead of me and the ones that are coming, that are saying, no, I want to be a woman. I want to be a full woman with both my feminine and my masculine side. And I want to be allowed that space to lead. And related to that is a little bit the previous conversation that we were having. And I really do believe that the model of leadership is changing towards a system of leadership, meaning it's not just the leader at the top, the masculine leader at the top that stands there and tells everybody else what to do. We're moving into a space which is much more collaborative, much more inclusive, where the role of the leader, in my view, is to support and empower everybody in their team to be their best possible self, as opposed to tell them this is exactly what we're going to do, and I'm always right, and I will explain that to you, and you're expected to follow. So I do think things are changing. In terms of what helped me along the path, I think it is having some positive role models, both women and men, and having somebody behind you that is willing to share their experience, their learnings, their journey, and to be transparent about that. So I don't know if I've made it. I'm not sure.
Absolutely.
I'm not sure yet, but I certainly think about this a lot, and I also teach in different universities on the topic of strategic philanthropy, which is obviously my expertise. But with that, I try to also transmit this idea that anybody can be a leader if they want to, and that leadership is not exclusively a masculine type of action.
Thank you. I would love to ask, a little bit. The title resonated with me because it was women founders, but it was the men who support them and are allies. And maybe you could share a little bit about how you've tried to be supportive in your career, as an executive, of women along their journey, women leaders, and also in a mentoring capacity.
Yeah, that's a great question. I think in my music background, I was a big proponent for women artists and the expression of women artists. So there was an artist I worked with, her name was India Ari. She was an acoustic guitarist. And if you think about all we're doing here, it's really about expression. What the young lady who told her heartfelt story, and I was literally like trying to fight back the tears, and maybe I should have not fought them back, right? That vulnerability. So I think one of the first ways I supported women was understanding nuance. And I feel like we also need a lexical redefinition, right? Because I think we're trapped within these words. And I read a poem once that said words are prisons. So I think oftentimes we're trapped within these words and we don't feel the nuance and the connectivity. I find it interesting, the word espiritu is neither masculine nor feminine, right? So it's a combination of both. So I think fast forward from music, because obviously I love music. Fast forward, I am all about investing in women founders. And the trait that I look for is, do they understand the perspective of the disadvantaged? And do they understand the little guy, right? And do they have that empathy, not just for themselves as a woman, but for other people? For example, I do some work with Defy Ventures for the formerly incarcerated in prisons. So I want my entrepreneurs to have some sort of passion about someone at the bottom of the stairs, someone we don't think about, and bring that to light, light being the best disinfectant. So, sorry for that long-winded answer.
No, that was great. That was great. One of the things you said that resonates is, being, as a leader, being supportive of individuals so they can be their true selves, true authentic selves. I think that's critical, and I've managed large teams, and I've learned along the journey how important that is. And I think this ties back to feminine traits, masculine traits, because there are stereotypes in business, in government, whatever industry you are in, and people feel that they have to conform to those stereotypes to succeed and move up the ladder. So how do you go about, each of you, I'd love to hear how you go about supporting individuals regardless of background or gender, and ensuring that they can really be their true selves and thrive.
So I'll give you an example in the philanthropic space in which I work. Co-Impact, which is an organization to which I'm a senior advisor, was started by Olivia Leland. She had done the Giving Pledge before, and her idea was, can we bring a group of philanthropists and foundations to pool their funding together and support initiatives in education, health, and economic opportunity in low and middle income countries. Now the trick is the majority of philanthropic money is held by men, and in particular by white men, right? So it's not a space that has a lot of diversity, at least not at that level. I have to say it took a lot of effort to convince a handful of major philanthropists to contribute. The first four were Bill and Melinda Gates, Jeff Skoll, Rockefeller Foundation, and a gentleman called Richard Chandler from New Zealand. Then we had the Nilehanis from India as well joining. And since then, I mean, this was late 2017 that Co-Impact was launched. And by now we have over 45 philanthropists and foundations from 16 different countries at different levels of giving, right? Some of the significant ones give very significantly for 10 years, others have lower commitments. The reason I'm telling you all of this is because in doing Co-Impact, in leading Co-Impact, we've faced so much discrimination and issues just because Co-Impact itself is women-led. And one of the things in our first fund that was important to us is to always have a gender lens in everything that we do. So for example, looking at the recipients of the philanthropic funds, whether they were women-led organizations. And a lot of foundations that are giving out grants, and giving quite significant grants, don't even collect that data, because they think that's something you should do only if you want to support gender equality, right? And we're saying it's important to look at the transparency and the light, as you said, bring light to the issue, even if your topic is not gender equality, if your topic is climate change, if your topic is education, whatever it is, at least look at who are you giving the money, right? And a lot of organizations, as I said, do not mention it. And also in more private conversations, I have seen how as Co-Impact, because the leadership team was dominated by women, we have been, some of the things that we were told or criticisms that were raised against us, I knew were 100% because we were a female-led team, as opposed to because of anything that is what we were doing. So I think it's very important to be conscious of these issues within your own organization, and how you treat the people within your team, and how you bring up this idea of different models of leadership, even in a sector which is traditionally dominated by men.
Yep, great.
Wow. What was the original question?
Really, so as a leader, supporting individuals who can, within your organization, so they can be their authentic, true selves and don't feel like they have to conform to stereotypes to be successful.
Yeah, I think it's you double down on focusing on whatever that group is you're trying to bring change for. So you always want to keep women a part of the conversation. You always want to keep BIPOC, Black, Indigenous people of color, part of the conversation. And I think you work to go against the tailwinds or the headwinds, because big corporate does work against us, right? Sort of what the work that you and Maria are doing, bringing together the Capital Alliance. That's bringing, women founders, BIPOC founders in front of a major corporation. And then guess what? They loved it, right? One of the top Korean business journalists invited us out to South Korea to do an event because, you guys put us in front. So I think it's doubling down. I think it's just going, full fast speed ahead, full forward on bringing women constantly, whatever it is, right? If I'm drinking coffee, women. If I'm going skiing, women. Whatever you're doing, it's women, 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 women. And sooner or later, that message kind of bleeds through, right?
Yeah, no, absolutely. One of the, my wife, who's actually also from Lima, and she's benefited greatly from, amazing mentors, both female and male mentors. So as a woman in a leadership role, how do you mentor those who work for you and work with you?
So I think there's a couple of things. First is I don't only mentor women, I also mentor men.
Yeah, of course, of course.
Which is quite important. And again, it's this sense that you care for the full person, right? So it's not that you're mentoring them, for example, when I was in strategy consulting, just because you want them to make partner, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Or just because you want them to work better on your projects, but because you genuinely care about that human being. And this has carried, whenever I've changed jobs, most of the people that I've mentored have continued being my mentees, no matter what my next role was or whatever I was doing. So I think that's the very first step, is mentoring the full person. Secondly, is helping to supplement whatever it is that they did not receive sufficient of as they were growing up. And this sounds a little bit esoteric, but you know, some of for example, women I've mentored are super accomplished individuals, but they didn't get enough self-confidence, right? Mm-hmm. And this is one of the things that you normally learn as a child, and it has to do with patterns in the family, ways that you've been put up or put down. There's many other things, right? And I think even in a business relationship of mentorship, you can help people to understand, you know, where they're coming from, and help supplement whatever it is that they didn't get enough of, to really fully develop and become the full person that they can be.
Yeah, I think there's a common misconception that people think, you know, early in your career you need a mentor, but maybe later in your career you don't. But really, it's a lifelong journey, and I think mentorship is so important at any stage, especially at the leadership stage, because that's when you have more influence. So that's a really good insight.
For sure, I would fully agree. I think it's about mentoring others, and you also learn a lot by mentoring others.
It's a mutual relationship.
And it's finding mentors that inspire you and people that you admire.
Yeah.
And having those very direct and honest conversations as well.
Yeah. I think the work you're doing, and we're working with you at LG around female entrepreneurs and, you know, supporting female entrepreneurs, supporting BIPOC, Black, Indigenous, and people of color that are in entrepreneurship is amazing. You know, there's still barriers that exist, and how do we do you have broader advice, and how do we break these barriers down? You know, globally, Davos is a global event, and are there any? How are you hopeful for the future there?
Yeah, I'm very hopeful. I think there's two things. One is nuance. You know, all day I've been sitting here and I've been watching this pretty cool picture in the background, and I noticed like the position he's in, right? And it requires sort of finesse and nuance. You know, we love Michael Jordan as a basketball player. Why? Because he's sort of finesse. He's not rigid like the old way. The best football players, I'm American, so I'll say football. You notice there's a movement about them. There's a fluidity, right? So I think A is fluidity, and then I think B is community building, right? So be fluid enough to enter into communities you normally wouldn't be comfortable in. Where did I learn this? Look at me. I used to hang in Nashville with country music artist people, and that was clearly a community that I was not native to. The opera community, right? Right? You know, I'm hanging with Cecilia Bartoli, and I'm like, okay, I'm understanding sonnets and everything. So I think it's community building, and I think it's sort of what the UN is trying to do, or that Olympic circles. So let me hang in a women's community. Let that woman hang in a Black community. Let us hang in an African community. Let us hang in a Dutch community. And what you start to see is this intersection and this interconnectivity, because that's the complex system everyone's talking about this morning. So we have to break away from our silos, and that will allow us to see this sort of decentralization, right? Sort of decentralized, break away from these hierarchical models where a male is at the top. No, we're all equal, but we don't know each other. So we have to sort of venture outside of that. And we can use each other. If Hans, you want to come hang with me with some jazz artists, let's do it. I've never skied. I'm scared to death, so please. I'm so scared of it. Please, start me off at the baby horse. You know, it's hanging with psychologists. It's hanging with, you know, genetic engineers. The more diverse you become, that's what someone mentioned H-Bush. John Harvard, right? He was a theologian, but those guys back then, they were kind of multifaceted. We have to get back to that, and that's going to help us connect to each other, and then empower women.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. It's fantastic. I'm curious, I think there's probably a lot of interest in this topic, and it's good to open it up. But before we open it up to the audience, any closing thoughts on this topic or something we did not cover?
The only thing that I'm thinking about is, again, based on the previous conversation, is how do you raise kids in a different way, right? And a lot of it goes by example, but at the same time, it's very hard to change within ourselves, right? I had a funny experience a few months ago when my daughter and my son go together to the same class, even though they're 2 years apart because they're in a Montessori school. And my daughter, one day she was sick, so her brother went, and he came back and he said, "Oh, good news, Annabelle, you've been elected the class representative. You have an important meeting, like whenever, with all the class representatives of the school to discuss our policy on the environment," or something along those lines. My daughter's reaction to that was, "Great, what am I gonna wear and how am I gonna do my hair?" And I can assure you that that's not something that she heard directly from me, or at least I don't think that's my first concern when I get invited to a meeting, right? So in theory, I'm raising a daughter that is, independent, a leader, that's seeing the role model of her mother, but then again, we still have the whole society and what they're seeing in other places, right? And that can also come through. So it's just a reflection about, how do we do we raise children with this new model of leadership that is not stereotypical and that allows them to find themselves and to grow in their own possibility.
I think that's probably a more relevant topic now than ever. I think one of the problems, social media, marketing, they enforce a lot of these stereotypes. And if we think about empowering individuals to be comfortable with their femininity, their masculinity outside of these norms, it's a challenge. It's a challenge, and especially in this time, I think more than ever. But probably worth another conversation on that. That's a deep topic. But I'll have
I'll be quick because Tiffany's giving me that look.
Oh no, you
I don't know if that's the Jordache look.
Okay.
Back from the 80s. Remember the Jordache look?
We have 15 minutes.
You've got time
Okay.
for question Q&A. Yeah. Plenty of time.
I forgot what I was going to say because I just was focused on the look. It was sort of like,
No, I was just sitting here
It was
thinking,
an
where's my
intense gaze.
invitation to come to hang out with Rockstars?
I literally forgot what I was going to say, so thank you, Tiffany. Help me refresh.
No worries. I was just closing thoughts before we go to audience Q&A.
Yeah, I think that there has to be this intersectionality where men, we really have to start championing women, right? And it has to be the other person championing the cause. I need to champion LGBTQ rights. Because if you think about it, who are the people championing civil rights in America? It was largely a lot of white people, right? And who needs to champion gay rights? Heterosexual people. Who needs to champion the rights of women? Gloria Steinem said it herself. The women's movement was really a men's movement. And it got mistranslated. Look that up. It blew my mind when she said that, right? So if men, my thought from all of this is, how can I be a better champion for women? Maybe there are other books I need to read. And then the last thing I'll say, I was at a South by Southwest, and there was this woman, Dr. Jennifer Brown. And I had never heard a white gay woman advocate for black people like that in my life. And that's what said, wait a minute, that's the intersectionality. So now we as men need to pick up the mantle and champion the cause for women. That's the missing link. Once we do that, it's NASA, as I like to say. So yeah, that's my final thought.
Yeah, no, that's a really important point. And I want to point out, I think, as leaders, one of the most important thing is, we have the ability to make decisions around building organizations and hiring. And if we want an organization to be, to represent equality and to support women, to support people of color, I think we have to be really thoughtful about the folks we're bringing into that organization. We want it to be representative, and that was one of the things when I led this program called the Presidential Innovation Fellows out of the White House, and when I joined, it was mostly men. It was mostly men, and the intent wasn't there, but it's because they were hiring engineers from Google and Facebook, and those at the time were very male-dominated industries. Thankfully, it's changing, but my whole leadership team, we made a really, we made the decision to be thoughtful about it. And by the time, I left the organization, it was half women, it was 65% people of color. But I think leaders have to make that choice and be thoughtful and about that. So
I would fully agree with that. And I think aside from championing women, from mentoring women, men can take very concrete steps towards at least visibility of women. So, for example, there's a number of men that I know, especially in the industry I work in philanthropy, that refuse to show up to a panel that only includes other men.
Yeah.
Right? But there's still a lot of organizations who think it's okay to put on panels and conferences where they're all white men, and they don't even think about it, right? But if some of the speakers themselves said, I'm not willing to come to this event until you have sufficient women in it, and also other minorities. Same here. At some point I got invited to speak to a relatively high-level event, and I was told, and I was like, I'm surprised. I'm the only woman out of, four speakers, and there's a moderator. And then I said, and I see everybody's white. I mean, I'm from South America, but other than that, they were like, yeah, precisely, you are our diversity speaker. I was like, what planet are you living in? So I think men can do many things when they notice that they're in circles that are exclusively men, especially exclusively white men, but at least raising visibility and not being willing to participate. And I think organizations need to look at the makeup of their own people, of their teams. And if ever you're investing money or giving money, you also need to look at the leaderships of the organizations that you are supporting.
That's fantastic. Maybe we'll open it up. This is been a really good conversation. I would love to hear from the audience.
So listen to you guys, right? There's actually two different issues here. Not issues, but ways to look at it. On the one, there's the leadership, right? But then on the other hand, there's the gender inequality, and it's different. You're talking, about women, ski with women. We now know it's not true because you don't like to ski. But anyways, but you know what I mean, right? But at the end of the day, all of us here, men, right, would support any woman founder. But is that why we're going to be the most efficient? I don't think it is, because the problem is all these men right now who have the money and are not investing in money. Wouldn't we be more efficient by going to actually not hang out with the women, even though we should, of course, but talking to those guys and saying, you're not looking at this right, and actually telling them, because we know that you're good at what you do, right? That's not the question. The question is, how do we get the people who right now are so stuck in their beliefs, etc., who are not going to even look at you? Then maybe we can make a difference there by hanging out and saying, why are you not investing in women? What is it about who you are that, you don't, it's not that you don't like women, but what is it? Oh, you know what, they're just weak. Really? So let me show you, boom, 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 right? So I wonder if that's also another approach to not just focus on the women, but really focus on those people who have the prejudice. And I think that's true of everything, whether it's racial, whether it's, LGBTQ, etc., etc. Maybe that's how we make a difference too. We don't just stay on one side, right?
I would agree with that. I wanted to add two thoughts. The first one is, at least my impression, maybe right or wrong, is every single system that we have in our world today has been designed for men, by men, and especially for white men. And the minute you are anything but a white man, your chances of getting opportunities of almost anything you want, regardless of your performance, are just harder, right? And that's what we're trying to change. So of course, yes, we need to change the mindsets of the majority of white men in the room, and the mindsets of everybody else to go with it. But coming back to what you said, I also think it's important to lead by example. It's not enough to come and tell your peer, oh, investing in women is a good idea, look at all of these reports, look at all of this evidence, but rather, I've invested in this woman. Let me take her to a meeting with you. I just want you to listen out to her. I'm not asking you to invest, but I'm asking you to listen, right? So it's little by little. And what I also know from studying social psychology at some point in the past is that, you know, the way you help people become more inclusive, the way you help people change their mindset about somebody or a group that they had previously discriminated, it's not by showing them the evidence of, you know, how bad that is or anything along those lines. People learn from their peers, from people that they think are very similar to them and that have just made a small switch, right? So you're not going to convince somebody who's never invested in a woman-led enterprise overnight to invest in a Black, disabled, woman with disabilities enterprise. That may not be your first step, right? So it's really bringing them closer to the goal, step by step.
Wow, that was really good. By the way, I love your beard. I shaved mine to come here. And I'm ashamed that I shaved my beard because it's nice and gray. I think we're saying two different things, and I'm glad you picked up on that. For me, it's about the community building, and also one of the other panelists mentioned special forces. If you understand what special forces does, they kind of parachute into a country and they develop that country against itself, unfortunately, right? But it's about community building. They have to learn the language. It's very different from what Navy SEALs do. I was in the Navy, right? Navy SEALs just kind of go, destroy. So I think the community building, I'll use LG if I can, any LG people here, forgive me. We kind of, building the Capital Alliance, we got this conservative Korean company to really rethink kind of the way they look at things. So much so that one of my co-founders, Bonin, and I, were invited to a business conference out in South Korea. And I think part of that for me comes from being raised in a different environment. Marita, one of the reasons I keep looking at you is you look just like my grandmother, right? Just that stern, kind of Germanic, but then loving at the same time. And you know, she would scare you and then sort of love you. It's like, you do it now. And it's like, and her name is Wilhelmina, right? So it's like, what kind of name for a grandmother? So I think it's the community, but I think for me, being raised around Jewish kids, Roman Catholic kids, this diversity gave me an appreciation of different cultures, right? So how do we cultivate that? So one of my ideas is bringing together, you know, corporate venture we talked about, bringing together some of these big corporations and challenging them, right? But in a way that doesn't make them feel guilty, in a way that makes them feel proud and proud to be part of the solution. So that's kind of, and so when we have that, you know, General Motors, LG, now we can then create programming to say, this is the agenda. This is how we kind of change the way we look at women. This is the way we kind of direct investment to women founders, right? So I think two different approaches, but both complementary.
Great, yeah. I don't think there's much I can add to these two. So I will, any other questions that we have?
We've got time for one more.
Okay, time for one more.
So, partly an observation, but also a question. So, the observation is that in my work, women tend to be much better investors because of that holistic view of the world. So, that's the observation. The question is, how do we actually get more women into investment decision-making positions, where the actual allocation of the capital gets made with that perspective? That changes things in that sense.
Yeah, that's a great one. I mean, we are working right now together, LG and your organization, to create an alliance of investors, and we, you know, I think we are being thoughtful of that, but we need to ensure and be held accountable there. But in the philanthropy world, I would love to get your thoughts.
Partly philanthropy, partly also, the actual
venture,
the actual allocation of capital. Even within corporate VCs, right? So LG is a corporate VC. How do we change and get women into those positions? Because the argument has always been, well, but they don't have the experience, right? But so, yeah.
Wow, I didn't think I was going to go first. So how do we kind of help direct the allocation of capital towards women? Well, I think one of the first things I thought was, we have to be careful on our kind of things that are social engineering, things that are interstellar. Anybody a sci-fi fan here? There was this movie called Interstellar with Christopher Nolan, but it really should be called intergenerational, because he was talking about the changes you make now that will take effect 2 to 3 generations from now. And Marita, we were talking about that. Corporations think, quarter to quarter, right? CFOs, COOs think quarter to quarter. So some of the change I think you're thinking about is gonna take place when we produce women of wealth who have a feminine mind state and are balanced, and they know how to allocate that wealth in a sort of balanced, holistic way. Part B is my personal view is just bring up women every time you drink coffee, right? Every time you do something. So changing the allocation, working with people like LG, getting corporate venture to deploy capital to these women's startups. But then on the other end, how do you get the women who are the CEOs? How do you get the women who are the, name a wealthy person, right? How do we generate that? I think that's going to take some time in my personal view. But I think we're on the way, and things like this are part of it. Isn't there, the sister from Togo, there's a super rich woman in Nigeria, I think.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah.
So my point is, A, how do we generate these next women billionaires? Because I think a woman billionaire is going to be able to direct capital differently. And I think the world's going to look at that mindset and say, oh, wow, and you know how men are, right? When we see something and say, oh, I should be doing that, we want to be cool. So I think when we have that next woman billionaire and billionaires, I think the rest of the crowd will follow. People don't agree, but that's just my theory.
I take a different view. First, we already have a number of women billionaires in the world.
More, but okay.
Yeah. Secondly, even in cases where most people assume that it's the men that made the money, it's usually not the case. Usually the woman had a very, very significant role. And I won't mention specific examples because they're related to my work, but I know some of these billionaire women, and they clearly had a role in creating the wealth. Secondly, we now have in philanthropy at least some women that are changing the practice of philanthropy, and I would mention Melinda Gates and Mackenzie Scott. The way they're doing it is much more following the trust-based approach, which doesn't mean blind trust, but it means for organizations that have already demonstrated what they can do, that have a track record, they can really reach scale and help millions of people, they're willing to step up and give the funding in a very significant way.
Can I say it too?
Yeah.
Sorry.
If you know, are you done yet?
No, so let me wrap up and then I'll allow to respond. And I think, so in philanthropy we're seeing the shift already, and I think it's really important. But for me, the best way to move things quicker is at a minimum transparency. I mean, what if all of those investment funds or venture funds were obliged to report on the gender and the leadership of the organizations that they're funding, right? When you see that you're funding 90% male-led organizations and the world is 50-50, what does it mean, right? I mean, you can just publish it, but then hopefully it would lead to you thinking, what are we doing differently to find the organizations that, or the companies that are worth investing in? And I think waiting for there to be more wealth in female hands is just a little bit of a long path. So I'd rather do it quicker.
How do you go the next step where the actual investment allocators are women as well, at scale?
Well, so that depends on the organizations, right? So it's both seeing that within, so whichever funding organization it is, whether it's a venture fund, they should look at the makeup of their own people, right? And not only how many people who work there are women, if they're in a secretarial role or in a role that has no direct influence, right? So in the leadership, how many members of the leadership team of these venture funds are women? And secondly, so one level is at the level of the organization itself, and secondly, in who they're giving the funding to. That's the other level of transparency that we should have. And honestly, I think just having transparency to start with, can lead to quite a lot of changes that we're not yet seeing.
I'm speechless, so, and I know we're probably at time.
I just want to jump in real quick. I completely agree on the transparency. I think public pressure is one of the best ways, and be transparent about where the capital is being deployed. Even within organizations, in the U.S., companies started putting out diversity statistics You know, they wouldn't necessarily initially declare where people were in the organization. And then you learned that, yes, they were hiring more diverse individuals, but they were at the lower level and not the higher level. And now there's been peer pressure around boards, and I think that moves the needle, like that really does. And I also think on the investment space, organizations like right now, we're putting together this network of advisors. I think transparency will help, but we have to make active decisions to, you know, have equal representation from the investor perspective, of women investors, of people of color that are investors, and also in the companies that we invest in. And that's why we're, you know, really focused on working with you and focused on women-led entrepreneurs and folks with diverse backgrounds. So anything else before, I know we're over time, but before we close?
No.
Okay. This is great. Thank you all.
Thank you so much.